We've all seen the headlines. Meta lays off 11,000 people. Amazon is expected to lay off something like 10,000 employees, and DoorDash let go of about 1,200 people. Twitter fired something like half their staff, and the other half is probably trying to figure out their escape plan, but Twitter's probably a unique situation. So are these unique one-off situations, or is there really a systemic shift in the industry for software developers? In this video, I want to go beyond the headlines, and I want to see what is actually going on in the tech industry and talk about how to best prepare for the worst case scenario. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these news headlines, they are meant to generate a lot of fear and anxiety, and therefore they might paint a bleaker picture than what is actually going on. If you guys remember way back in the early days of the pandemic, even though sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday, when we were all stuck at home binge watching Netflix, ordering food from DoorDash, and taking all of our meetings via Zoom, obviously we were all online a lot more. Tech companies enjoyed crazy strong growth in the early days of the pandemic, and everyone and their grandma were getting these above market offers and insane stock options. Because of this, a lot of them went on these hiring sprees thinking that the growth would just go on indefinitely. By now, we know that that wasn't the case. A classic example of this is Peloton, whose share price went up something like 450% in the early days of the pandemic. All the gyms were closed and people had to find a way to get exercise indoors. Once things started opening up again, the demand dropped like a rock, and so did their share price. I guess you could say hindsight is 2020, but I mean, I didn't think for a single minute people were going to continue paying like $80 a month to ride their stationary bikes indoors once everything started opening up again. So now it's 2022 and consumer behavior has changed, and so has macroeconomic conditions. Now that things have finally opened up, people are going outside a lot more, spending money on in-person activities and services rather than online apps and software. Netflix and Meta both saw their user base shrink for the very first time. On top of this, tech companies are reckoning with higher interest rates, inflation, which means investment capital is pretty hard to come by, so startups have less cash. The CEO of DoorDash says, "We weren't as rigorous as we should have been in managing our team growth. That's on me." As a result, operating expenses grew quickly. So the startups that were really dependent on outside funding because they weren't yet profitable were really in trouble. And finally, another major reason for these layoffs is that in a recession, advertising and marketing budgets are often the first things to go. And so for tech companies that are heavily reliant on advertising revenue, such as like Google and Meta, Twitter, maybe Snapchat, they are suffering a lot. People aren't spending as much on marketing and promotion and paid advertising. All right, so what does this mean for software engineers? The first thing to remember is to not panic. Once I started doing a little bit more research and dig deeper into the news articles and statements from the CEOs, one thing I noticed is that the roles being eliminated are more likely to be in operations, marketing, recruiting, rather than software engineering. According to The Verge, Mark Zuckerberg said that Meta's recruitment team was disproportionately impacted by the layoff, which makes sense. They're not going to do a lot of growth or hiring in the short term. Now, that's obviously not to say that software engineers aren't getting laid off at all. I mean, that's not the case from all of the layoff posts that I see on LinkedIn on a daily basis. But I think it's really encouraging to see that relative to other roles, engineers are still somewhat more recession-proof than, say, people in recruiting or marketing or HR. If we take a step back and just use our common sense, it's pretty clear to see that globally, people are spending more and more time online, relying more on online services. More business is being conducted digitally. Things are becoming more digital, not analog. Therefore, it should go without saying that experienced, decent engineers are still very much in demand, and they will be for the foreseeable future. So stop panicking. A lot of the volatility in the industry right now and a lot of the layoff, I think, is the result of the market readjusting itself after the hyper growth that happened earlier on in the pandemic. There was so much growth in the pandemic, people thought that would last forever. Obviously it didn't. Now things are going back to kind of like pre-pandemic level. I'm no economist, but I think that the industry will stabilize again and the demand for software engineers will continue to grow, but at a steadier, slower pace. All right, so how do we best prepare for these slightly more turbulent times? A lot of companies claim that their layoffs aren't based on performance, but I think that's kind of BS. From my personal experience, every round of layoffs that I've been through, they've been at least partially based on performance. I mean, the people that conduct these layoffs and decide who to keep and who to go, they're people too, and obviously they're gonna want to keep around people that they know are making a big impact and that they enjoy being around. So if you're worried about your job security, the first thing I would do is to make your impact obvious. Now, this is not to say that you need to work a lot harder, because we all know from experience that the hardest working employees aren't necessarily the ones getting promoted. What I mean is make your impact be seen and obvious to the people above you. Are you working on a product that is mission critical for the company or for the CEO? Remember that when layoffs happen, the first people that are cut are the ones working on projects that aren't seen as critical to the company's survival and growth. For example, at Amazon, a lot of the people that were laid off were on the Alexa and devices teams because they were costing the company a lot of money and they weren't really bringing in a lot of revenue. So compared to people working on Amazon AWS, which is a significant profit driver for Amazon, people that were on the Alexa and devices team were probably much more likely to get laid off. For example, Meta laid off 11,000 people, so about 13% of their entire staff, but they kept a lot of the people that were working on the metaverse because it's a massive priority for the CEO. Therefore, if you are worried about your job security and your role, the best thing you can do right now is to make sure that you're on a team that's working on a project that is a major priority of the executives or a key revenue driver like Amazon AWS. One other thing you can do if you work at a smaller startup is to just make yourself a little bit more seen. And this sounds really dumb, but I think it's something that a lot of people overlook. Even something as simple as going into the office a little bit more often, make your presence known by just turning on your camera when you're in a Zoom meeting can make a really big difference. You gotta remember that the people that are conducting these layoffs, they're human too, right? So if you build a deeper connection with your higher up, it's going to make a big difference when it comes time to decide who to keep and who to let go. All of that being said, I think the most important thing to do during any recession or layoffs is to rely on yourself and not rely on one company for your financial well-being. It's especially important during these uncertain times to get your finances in order. I'm no David Ramsey, but the best thing that money can buy right now is the sense of security and peace of mind. There isn't a single item, whether it's a sports car or a designer bag, that is going to feel better than being able to go to sleep at night not worried about losing your job because you have an emergency fund and all of your bills are paid. So if you're particularly paranoid about being impacted by the layoff, one of the best things you can do right now for yourself is to set up your emergency fund to tide you over the next few months while you're looking for your next job. This way, you're also in a much better position to negotiate your next offer because you don't have to just accept any offer out of desperation simply because you're running out of money or severance. Finally, the next best thing to do is to assume that you've already been laid off. Now, what do I mean by this? Most people start interview prep the minute they get laid off, but just think about how stressful that is. It's been years since your last data structures and algorithms class, and you have to basically start all over again at square one with LeetCode easy questions, and meanwhile, you're running out of time, your employment insurance is running out. What if instead you consistently dedicate an hour or two every single week to interview prep? Then you'd be in a much better position to start interviewing right away if the worst case scenario does happen. I think that especially if you do struggle with the interview process, you should be going on interviews every once in a while, even if you're not actively looking to switch up your job, just to brush up on your interview skills. I know this sounds like a lot of work and a big hassle, but I don't think it's a waste of time. Even if you never get laid off, it's not a bad thing as an engineer to be really good at systems design and data structures, right? By the way, if you're preparing for a software developer job interview, be sure to check out my video on most commonly asked JavaScript interview questions, which I'll link somewhere below or in this video. Let me know in the comments below, have you been impacted by the recent layoff? And if so, what is your next step? I want to hear from you. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today. But if you're still interested in hearing more about the job market and the software development industry, be sure to check out my video on the top paying tech companies in 2022. I will see you in the next one.